Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer has said that a number of countries were ready to join Europe's new coalition of the willing to help Ukraine.
Coalition of the willing to defend a deal in Ukraine.
Are we on the brink of World War III? Donald Trump seems to think so. Well, 3 years after the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, the world is finally seeking a solution. But not just any solution, one that will perhaps grant Ukraine full independence while ensuring the safety and security of its people. But with no such agreement reached in Washington over the weekend, Ukraine has turned to its allies in Europe. And now, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer seems to have the answers. A new way of ensuring Ukrainian security, but at what risk? Perhaps the risk of the infamous British Eurofighter Typhoon FGR4. But will it work? And what does the US have to say about this possible provocative move on the backdrop of the 3rd anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine? A light can finally be seen at the end of the tunnel. But this might not be the kind of peace Ukraine is seeking. February 12, 2025, marked an historic day, and the first time since the war that a US president would directly communicate with President Putin. This time, it was US President Donald Trump, and according to his team, the call lasted about 1.5 hours. But this 90-minute call would have far bigger ramifications for the war than any other call had before. President Trump explained the call by mentioning the wide variety of topics the two had discussed. According to his Truth Social statement, the call covered everything, including AI, the Middle East situation, energy, the US dollar, and most importantly, the situation in Ukraine. But this was the moment the US's demeanor toward Ukraine changed. Trump would lash out at Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on various occasions following the call, which includes calling the Ukrainian president a dictator on numerous occasions. It was clear Trump had shifted his priorities. Instead of protecting Ukraine, Trump wanted to find a way for the US to get out of funding the war or striking a deal. Moreover, the day after the call, the markets had already reacted. The Moscow Exchange, or MOX, rose by over 6%, while the RTS index further rose by another 6%. Both clearly indicated that the call between Putin and Trump was positive for both parties. But this is not all. So, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Turn on the notification bell and make sure you stay informed. According to the Trump administration, plans are already in the works for the two presidents to meet. Saudi Arabia would make the most sense, with its crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, having great relations with both parties. In fact, the phone call set off a major chain of events. Less than a week later, a meeting was called in Saudi Arabia. On the US side was Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and in a somewhat unknown capacity, Steve Witkoff. Representing Russia was Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Foreign Policy Advisor Yuri Ushakov. The main topic of conversation? A ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. But what shocked the world was the fact that neither Ukraine nor any representative of the EU was invited. In fact, Russia and the US possibly discussed the future of Ukraine, with no stakeholders present. So, the EU kicked into action, trying to find their own way to bring a ceasefire to the war. An emergency summit was called in Paris, seeking a new way to punish Russia. But what was the answer? Well, sanctions. In a very predictable move, the EU imposed their 16th round of sanctions on the Russian Federation. This move would target virtually every possible stream of revenue the Russian government had from Europe. But a quick look at the history of sanctions to Russia doesn't prove to be effective. Despite it being highly effective during the first years of the war, now it has diminishing effects. Following the first few rounds of sanctions, inflation skyrocketed from 6.8% to a whopping 13.8%, and GDP fell between 3 and 4%. Despite what the media tells you about these sanctions not being effective, many did wonders. But the large majority didn't have such a drastic effect on the Russian economy. Russia would quickly establish partnerships with the likes of China, Iran, and India in a bid to continue trading. Nevertheless, the Russian economy is still struggling, with inflation at 9.9% and interest rates over 20% to combat this inflationary problem. On top of these sanctions, various European countries also vowed continuous military support to Russia, including the big question of how Ukraine will remain secure when a ceasefire is finally agreed to. One such suggestion is the deployment of the British Eurofighter Typhoon, a 4.5 generation, multi-role fighter that will be tasked with policing the air around the Ukrainian border. On top of that, Prime Minister Starmer have suggested British boots on the ground. The idea is that these boots on the ground would serve as a deterrence to Russian soldiers. Many expect that much like the Minsk Agreement. Following the 2014 Russian invasion of Ukraine, Russia might again try to violate a ceasefire. Having European troops on the ground, along with the coveted Eurofighters, would significantly deter the Russians. Well, that is the thought of Keir Starmer. He also exclaimed the need for a U.S. backstop, or at least some kind of security guarantee that would further deter Russia. According to Starmer, the UK and other European members would increase military production, including a recent announcement of building more than 5,000 air defense missiles to be delivered to Ukraine over the next few years. Interestingly, the UK has also cut its aid budget from 0.5% to 0.3% of its GDP. This will now be moved to increasing its defense budget. Starmer believes it should be around 2% of total GDP by 2027. But there is a problem. Can the UK actually afford to have boots on the ground in Ukraine? By all estimates, the UK would be able to have around 4,000, if not fewer, troops to permanently place in Ukraine. According to the House of Commons, the UK currently has around 148,000 military personnel, of which just over 75,320, are considered to be active. Of this, just over 10,000 are actively stationed across Europe, a far cry from the more than 60,000 U.S. troops in Europe and the additional 10,000 rotational troops the U.S. have stationed in Poland alone. By all estimates, the UK would be able to have around 4,000, if not fewer, troops to permanently place in Ukraine. These troops will need to cover more than 1,400 miles along the Ukrainian border. However, France has about 200,000 active personnel, including another 180,000 for Germany. This means that to cover the entirety of Ukraine's eastern border, the UK will need the assistance of these two giants. Unfortunately, Emmanuel Macron later denied any French troops to Ukraine, merely suggesting in early January that French troops might assist in training Ukrainian soldiers. This doesn't provide enough security for the Ukrainians to prevent another full-scale Russian invasion. Well, in steps the Eurofighter Typhoon once again. This unique aircraft is slightly more powerful and advanced than the fourth-generation F-16, but it doesn't truly compare with the likes of F-22 Raptor or the F-35. What the Eurofighter does do, however, is pose a direct threat to Russia. Its unique design, including advanced avionics and stealth capabilities, makes it one of the ideal policing aircraft, possibly even giving Ukraine the ability to overcome Russian air defenses. Fortunately, Starmer didn't say the UK would give Ukraine these aircraft, but rather operate them on Ukrainian soil. The question is whether this is a good decision, or does it put British pilots at risk? Well, the UK currently houses around 137 of these aircraft. They are evenly split between the Tranche 1, Tranche 2, and Tranche 3 variants. The RAF, who heavily relies on this armament, would now have to determine how many they are willing to sacrifice to Ukraine, to put it bluntly. Now, this might seem like an easy choice, given the fact that the UK is not at war, but the current geopolitical climate does leave one vulnerable. Moreover, the UK only has about 37 F-35B aircraft. only serving as a Level 1 partner on the U.S. F-35 program. Ideally, this plan would work to keep Russian drones and aviation aggression at bay. But there is still one thing that needs to be answered. If the UK supplies these aircraft to Ukraine following the ceasefire deal, what happens if Russia shoots down a British aircraft? Does Britain retaliate? Will it enforce Article 4 of the NATO agreement? And is the UK willing to risk further escalation with Russia? Despite the EU banding together, making decisions, and further rallying behind Ukraine, nothing can be done without a US backstop. Even Prime Minister Starmer acknowledged this in a recent meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky. One thing the world already knows is that Russia doesn't fear the EU, nor does it fear the UK. However, Russia doesn't want to be embroiled in a conflict with the United States. Since the two countries both have a host of nuclear weapons, Russia would never risk a direct confrontation with the United States. So, what does a backstop mean? Well, Zelensky is adamant about having US boots on the ground, but not just any boots. Ukraine wants the United States to set up a military presence along the Russian border. But if you remember back to the start of the war, this will never work. In fact, Ukraine desperately wanted to become part of NATO. The idea was that this would not only protect them under Article 4 of the NATO agreement, but it would permit the US to set up shop on the Russian border. The idea, which was floated by the Biden administration, was quickly shot down in negotiations. So, Putin would never accept US boots on his western border. It is too much of a risk, and despite Donald Trump being in office, Putin is thinking far off in the future. This brings us back to policing the air around the Ukrainian border as the best solution to assist European boots on the ground. The idea won't work, and the numbers speak for themselves. As mentioned, the RAF has 137 of these aircraft, at a readiness of 60%. This means that about 80 of these planes can fly at any time. According to many reports, it would take not one, not two, not 10, but dozens of these aircraft to patrol the skies around the Ukrainian border. But the RAF can only deploy about 30 if adequate spares are available. Moreover, the Russian S-400 missile system is touted to be one of the most advanced air defense systems in the world. On the other hand, the Russian Air Force has over 900 aircraft, split between MiGs and the newer Su variations. In fact, the Russian MiG-31 has a reputation of outperforming many fourth-generation fighters. And despite the fact that the Eurofighter is far superior, it is simply outnumbered. Furthermore, this would mean that the RAF could deploy 2 aircraft every couple of hours, which would leave numerous gaps in its defense. To make this work, the RAF would need to deploy its full squadrons of operational aircraft if it were to provide 24-hour protection. Fortunately, there is a possible solution to this problem, namely the Mirage 2000 as a way of plugging up the gaps. Yes, France has recently pledged the delivery of about 24 Mirage 2005 aircraft to assist in Ukraine, and many experts suggest that these are already designed to make them effective as part of Western air defense systems. On top of this, these Mirage 2000 aircraft are also operated by Ukrainian pilots. This means that various policing strategies could be coordinated. The Ukrainian Air Force can effectively combine with the RAF and other willing members to set up a decent air defense system. The Mirage is also considered a fourth-generation fighter and has vastly outperformed the F-16 in the Ukrainian war. Despite the F-16 being a better combat aircraft, the Mirage has the ability to carry the highly effective Storm Shadow missiles. This long-range cruise missile has been used to devastating effect in the Black Sea. Its long-range strike capabilities also allow Ukraine to strike deep into the Russian territory. This by itself already creates a lot of unease among the Russian president. By all accounts, such a setup could lead to a time bomb, just waiting to be triggered. Which brings us back to a US backstop, or more NATO intervention. Not every NATO partner can, or even wants to support Russia. with Poland being the last defensive stronghold should Russia take Ukraine. It puts a lot of pressure on the country. Poland has mentioned the fact that various missions are being conducted to secure its own border. The Operations Command of the Polish Armed Forces also assured that it is closely monitoring the war, while being on its highest level of readiness. This is the highest level of readiness Warsaw had ever seen. The other wild card to this situation is Turkey. Recently, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has stated that Turkey is willing to host peace negotiations between the two parties. A ceasefire here would be very beneficial for Turkey. In fact, its government has been treading a very fine line between the two parties. Ankara has been vocal about the territorial sovereignty of Ukraine, while maintaining strong economic ties with the Russian Federation. It has also exclaimed that, while Turkey will contribute to peace talks, they will not be part of enforcing it. This basically eliminates Europe's second biggest military from peace proceedings. It also firmly puts the ball back into the hands of the other EU nations. Essentially, it significantly reduces NATO's ability to enforce a ceasefire without the assistance of the United States. So, what is Donald Trump's plan to have and maintain peace in Ukraine? It doesn't take a genius to figure out that Trump and Zelensky currently don't see eye to eye. In fact, the world is seeing far more agreement from Putin to Trump's ideas than it does from Zelensky, and it is currently causing all sorts of chaos in Europe. On Friday, February 28th, Presidents Trump and Zelensky met for the first time following his inauguration. The plan for the meeting was to ensure a deal could be struck between the United States and Ukraine. While many of the details are still unknown, White House officials have confirmed that the deal entails Ukrainian minerals. The U.S. would be entitled to help mine and process these minerals in a bid to make up for U.S. support. But it doesn't say anything about security guarantees to Ukraine. Unfortunately, the meeting ended as soon as it began. In an unprecedented moment, U.S. President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance would engage in a war of words with the Ukrainian leader. Zelensky found himself booted from the White House in the aftermath. Unfortunately, no deal was reached. According to Trump, the deal itself would provide a backstop. Since the United States will be investing in the country, it means ordinary U.S. civilians would be on the ground. These citizens will be responsible for processing these rare earth minerals, while also rebuilding the country. Trump believes that if U.S. citizens are present in Ukraine, Putin wouldn't dare to make a move. Republicans across the board, including Senator Lindsey Graham, seem to agree. But this move would be far more beneficial to the U.S. than it would Ukraine. It will stop the aid to Ukraine, saving the U.S. taxpayer money, but also disrupt the current military-industrial complex. Moreover, the U.S. would have rights to Ukrainian minerals that could put them on par with China. This move will see the U.S. ensure future dominance as the global superpower. It also keeps U.S. boots out of Ukraine, saving on military costs, and perhaps even a possible outbreak of conflict. Trump also floated the idea that Ukraine would have to cede some of its territory. In fact, Trump mentioned this throughout his 2024 presidential campaign. Number 47 believes that Biden should have stopped the war sooner, but now it is too late for Ukraine to hold on to all its territory. What we can say is that Donbass and Crimea are certainly off the table for the Ukrainians, but cities like Zaporizhzhia, Kharkiv, and Kherson are among those cities still disputed. Furthermore, no one truly knows the extent of resources in Ukraine. In fact, the last audit done was by the Soviets. Experts also suggest that most of the resources the U.S. wants are in these occupied territories, and it doesn't seem like Putin is ready to cede the territory he has taken. By all accounts, this seems like a stalemate as of the time of this video, but things can change in an instant. Unless consensus can be reached soon, it doesn't seem like the war will end anytime soon. The North Korean injection of troops has given Russia another lifeline. Russia also doesn't care about using the war as a meat grinder. In layman's terms, Russia is prepared for a war of attrition, and ready to wait it out. Putin understands that unless Ukraine makes meaningful moves, Western allies will eventually grow tired of this war. This is already happening in countries like Germany and France, where right-wing parties are slowly increasing in the polls. The major divide between Europe and the US in this situation is not helpful either, and perhaps this could lead to the US splitting from NATO. Faced with such a threat, NATO might need to consider focusing on itself instead of Ukraine. But what do you think? Will the UK strategy of policing the air work? Does Europe have enough Eurofighter Typhoons? And will the US eventually allow for the F-35 to assist? These are the major questions after this incredible week in geopolitics. Make sure to like and subscribe, and smash that notification bell as we release videos every single day.